Alright, the next part is deindividuation. Now Hogg and Vaughan define deindividuation as a process whereby people lose their sense of socialized individual identity and engage in unsocialized and often antisocial behaviors. Now Zimbardo distinguished individuated behavior and deindividuated behavior. Individuated behavior is behavior in which is rational and conforms to acceptable social standards, whereas deindividuated behavior is based on primitive urges and does not conform into society's norms. Now, apparently to Zimbardo, being a part of a large crowd can diminish the awareness of individuality because individuals are faceless and anonymous. There is less fear of retribution and a diluted sense of guilt. Now, Malamuth and Check questioned male students at an American university and found that 1/3 of them admitted that if there was a chance of them being able to commit rape without being identified, they would do it. Now, a person who is self-focused tends to act accordingly to internalized attitudes and moral standards. If, however, individuals may become submerged within a group, they may lose their self-focus and become less privately self-aware. Now, research related to deindividuation includes the Stanford prison experiment by Zimbardo, where a make-believe prison was created in a Stanford University, where the guards were dressed up in the typical massive glasses and suits, whereas the prisoners were dressed in numbers, and they took away their name. Were dressed in just like rags, and they took away their name and gave them numbers instead. Now, the dehumanization of the prisoners by the guards, together with the relative anonymity of each group, made it easier for the guards to treat the prisoners in a brutal manner, so the study had to be stopped after 6 days. Basically, Zimbardo stripped university students of all of their individuality and gave them roles like a play. And then they found that the prisoners were being abused by the police officers, and the police officers were being more aggressive because they believe that they're not doing anything wrong because their individuality has been taken from them. Now, another research into deindividuation was done by Watson. Watson tested the hypothesis that warriors who significantly changed their appearance when going to war would be more likely to torture, mutilate, and kill their victims than would warriors from societies that did not change their appearance when going to war. Now, the results were as followed. Of 13 societies that killed, tortured, and mutilated their victims, all but one changed their appearance, either through war paint or other things, before the battle. Then, of 10 societies that were less brutal towards their victims, 7 out of 10 did not change their appearance, and thus were not deindividuated. Now, the evaluation of this study is that the reports out of the reports they contain were typically produced by researchers with cultural practices and expectations of those different from those of the people studied. Consequently, while the reports may include important information, they may also reveal about the biases and values of the researchers that created them. Now, another evaluation is that it's supported by Zimbardo's study of the Stanford prison experiment. Now, deindividuation in mobs, the baiting crowd, basically those who chant for people to when people commit suicide. Mann analyzed 21 incidents of suicide reported in American newspapers in the 1960s and the 1970s. He found that 10 out of the 21 cases where a crowd gathered to watch baiting had occurred, i.e., the crowd gathered the potential suicidee to jump. These incidents tended to occur at night when the crowd was large and when the crowd was some distance away from the person being taunted. Now, Mann claimed that features such as darkness, the size of crowd, and the distance were likely to produce a state of deindividuation in the individual members of the crowd. Now, the faceless crowd. The more people that were in the mob, the greater the individuation that occurred, and the greater the savagery which members of the crowd killed their victims. Now, evaluation of deindividuation. Deindividuation and pro-social behavior. Now, there is other evidence showing that deindividuation may sometimes produce increase in pro-social behavior rather than in antisocial behavior, i.e., groups of religious people giving to charity. That's still deindividuation, but it's showing pro-social behavior rather than antisocial behavior. Now, the role of anonymity. Researchers have often failed to distinguish between the effects of anonymity of those being aggressed against as opposed to the anonymity of those doing the aggressing. Social norms and behavior. Rather than individuals pursuing behavior based on primitive urges and not conforming to society's norms, they might be seen as conforming into a local group of norms. Now, deindividuation in football crowd and violence. Marsh and his colleagues found that what might appear as an undisciplined mob on match days can actually consist of several different groups, each with their place in the status hierarchy. They also found that much of the aggression displayed were highly ritualized rather than physically violent.